Have you ever looked at your own blood relatives and wondered if they would kill you for money? I never did until I woke up on a freezing lake with no engine, no signal, and my 11-year-old daughter shivering beside me. They planned a perfect funeral, but they made a fatal mistake. They forgot that a desperate father does not just survive. He returns to burn down their hell. Their lawyers offered $2 million to silence this story, but I am telling it anyway. My name is Michael Williams. I am 42 years old, and I have spent the last 15 years of my life designing structures that are meant to stand the test of time as the lead architect for the Apex Horizon Group. I understand load-bearing walls wind shear and the precise mathematics required to keep a skyscraper from toppling over in a storm. But as I opened my eyes that morning, nothing in my education or my career could have prepared me for the structural failure of my own life. The first thing I registered was the cold. It was not just a chill in the air. It was a damp, pervasive heaviness that seemed to have soaked through my woolen sweater and into the marrow of my bones. I tried to sit up, but my head swam with a nauseating dizziness, a heavy fog that mirrored the world outside. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the world remained a wall of impenetrable white. I was on the boat. That much I knew. It was a rented pontoon, a floating platform of aluminum and vinyl that we had taken out onto Silver Lake earlier that day. Or was it yesterday? My internal clock was scrambled. I looked around expecting to see the familiar faces of my family. I expected to see my brother Richard laughing at the helm, my sister-in-law Vanessa reapplying her sunscreen, or my parents Arthur and Margaret sipping their expensive wine and criticizing the scenery. Instead, I saw only the gray mist. It was the kind of fog specific to the Pacific Northwest, a thick blanket that swallows sound and light alike. The silence was absolute. It was a dead, suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums. There was no hum of the engine, no lapping of waves against the hull. Just nothing. Then I saw her. Lily. My daughter was curled up on the bench seat opposite me, wrapped in a thin windbreaker that was entirely insufficient for this temperature. She was 11 years old, but in her sleep she looked so much smaller, so fragile. I scrambled across the deck, my limbs feeling heavy and uncoordinated panic rising in my throat like bile. I placed a hand on her cheek. It was cool, too cool. "Lily," I croaked. My voice sounded foreign, scratchy and weak. "Lily, wake up!" She did not stir. Her breathing was shallow and rhythmic, a deep, chemically induced slumber. A terrifying memory flashed through my mind. Before we had boarded my mother, Margaret had insisted on making Lily a cup of her special herbal tea to help with her motion sickness. "It is just ginger and chamomile, darling," she had said with that sweet, grandmotherly smile. "It will help her relax." I shook Lily gently, then harder. She let out a soft moan but did not wake. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They had drugged her. They had drugged an 11-year-old child. I stood up the boat, rocking gently under my shifting weight. "Richard!" I screamed into the fog. "Dad! Mom!" My voice died instantly in the mist, absorbed by the moisture in the air. There was no echo, no reply. I stumbled toward the helm, the captain's chair where Richard had been sitting when I last remembered anything. The space was empty. I looked over the side of the pontoon. The sleek white speedboat that my family had arrived in, the one tied to our side for the journey out to the picnic spot, was gone. I gripped the steering wheel of the pontoon, my knuckles turning white. I reached for the ignition key. The slot was empty. My breath hitched. "Okay, stay calm. Think like an architect. Assess the structure. Assess the problem. Maybe they took the key by mistake? Maybe they went to get help?" I looked down at the control panel. The radio receiver was there, a standard Marine VHF unit. I grabbed the microphone, my thumb jamming down on the transmit button. "Mayday, mayday. This is Michael Williams on Silver Lake. We are stranded. Is anyone out there?" Static. Not even the crackle of a channel open. Just dead air. I pulled the unit forward, checking the back. The wires had been cut. They had not been pulled out or frayed by age. They had been sheared clean through the copper ends, bright and shiny against the gray light. This was done with a pair of wire cutters. Precision, intent. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, warring with the freezing air. I began to tear the boat apart, looking for the emergency equipment. Every rental boat is required by law to have oars. I checked under the bench seats. Nothing but empty storage compartments. I checked the stern. The emergency flare gun box was there. I opened it with trembling fingers. Empty. I ran to the back of the boat to the outboard motor. I unscrewed the fuel cap and peered inside, shaking the canister. It felt light. Too light. I tapped the side. It rang hollow. They had siphoned the tank. I slumped back against the captain's chair, my legs finally giving out. This was impossible. This was my family. Richard, my own brother. My parents who had raised me. They were difficult, yes. They were obsessed with status and money, yes. But this? Leaving us to drift in the middle of a freezing lake, with no way to call for help? My hand brushed against something taped to the underside of the helm station. I frowned, reaching down to peel it off. It was a piece of paper, but it had been laminated, sealed in plastic to protect it from the water. I held it up to the dim light. The handwriting was typed impersonal. Do not worry, Michael. It will be everything you wanted. Quiet. Peaceful. It will be over soon. This is a release. I stared at the words, reading them over and over until they blurred. A release. It was the way you talked about euthanizing a sick dog, not murdering your son and granddaughter. The lamination made my stomach churn. You do not laminate a spur-of-the-moment note. You do not laminate a prank. This had been prepared days, maybe weeks in advance. They had sat in an office, printed this out, and run it through a machine, knowing exactly where they would stick it. I looked back at Lily. She shifted slightly, pulling her knees to her chest in her sleep. The rage that ignited in my chest was hot enough to burn off the fog. They hadn't just targeted me. They had included her. They were willing to let her freeze to death or die of dehydration just to get rid of me. My hand instinctively went to my pocket for my phone. Empty. The memory came rushing back, sharp and clear. Before we boarded, Richard had made a big show of it. "Let's disconnect, Mike," he had said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Just us and nature. No emails, no calls. Come on, put it in the box." He had held out a heavy-duty waterproof Pelican case. I had hesitated. I always kept my phone on me, but my mother had chimed in. "Oh, stop being so addicted to work, Michael. Do it for Lily." So I had done it. I had dropped my iPhone into the box. Vanessa had put hers in. Dad had put him in. Richard had locked the box and placed it in his bag. "Safe and sound," he had said. I realized now that the box had likely never made it onto the pontoon boat. Or, if it had, it left with them on the speedboat. We were completely cut off. I forced myself to stand up. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I was an architect. I solved problems. That was what I did. I looked at the boat again, stripping away the emotion and seeing it as a structure. It was a 20-foot pontoon. Aluminum tubes. Stable but slow. High windage. I looked up at the sky, trying to gauge the sun's position through the fog. It was impossible to tell the time of day, but the light was fading. The temperature was dropping. We were drifting. I needed to know where we were going. I licked my finger and held it up. A slight breeze from the north. On Silver Lake, the currents were treacherous. They didn't just push you to shore. They funneled toward the rocky cliffs on the east side or out toward the spillway. Without an engine, we were just debris. I began a second, more thorough search of the boat. I got down on my hands and knees, crawling along the marine carpet. I felt under every lip of the fiberglass molding. I checked the gaps between the seats. "Come on," I whispered to myself. "They are arrogant. They are sloppy. They missed something." Richard was a businessman, not an engineer. He looked at the big picture, the bottom line. He rarely paid attention to the details. That was my job. That was why I was the one who caught the discrepancies in the company ledgers, and that was why I was the one currently stranded on a lake. But maybe his lack of attention to detail would save us. I reached under the rear bench seat, my fingers brushing against cobwebs and old grime. Then, I felt hard plastic. I pulled it out. It was Lily's drone. It was a small, consumer-grade quadcopter she had been playing with on the dock before we left. One of the propeller arms was snapped clean off, likely stepped on or jammed in there when they were clearing the boat. It would never fly again. I stared at the broken piece of technology in my hands. Useless. Or was it? I turned it over. The gimbal camera was cracked, but the slot on the side, I pressed my thumbnail against the tiny SD card, and it clicked, popping out into my palm. My heart hammered against my ribs. Lily filmed everything. She was aspiring to be a vlogger, constantly narrating her life. If she had this drone on the boat, or if she had been recording before they took off, I had no way to read the card. No phone, no laptop. But the data was there. It was a witness. If we survived this, if I could get this card to a computer, it might have captured audio. It might have captured faces. It might have captured the exact moment they decided to abandon us. I carefully placed the tiny memory card into the zippered pocket of my pants, checking it 3 times to ensure it was secure. I sat back on the driver's seat and looked at my wrist. I wore a vintage mechanical watch, a gift to myself, when I made partner at the firm. It did not need a battery. It did not need a signal. It just needed movement to keep ticking. I looked at the dial. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We had boarded the boat at 10 in the morning. 6 hours. I stared at the sweeping second hand. Tick, tick, tick. 6 hours. For the first hour, I could have told myself it was an accident. Maybe the engine died and they went to get a tow and got stuck. For the second hour, I could have told myself it was a sick prank. Richard, trying to teach me a lesson about toughening up. But 6 hours? In 6 hours, you could drive back to the city and back. In 6 hours, the park rangers would have done a sweep of the lake. In 6 hours, if anyone had reported us missing, a helicopter would be overhead. The silence of the lake suddenly screamed the truth at me. They were not coming back. They were not looking for help. Right now, Richard was probably practicing his grief-stricken face in a mirror. My mother was probably rehearsing her tearful plea to the local news stations. They were writing the narrative of the tragic accident. Poor Michael. He was so unstable after his wife died. He took little Lily out on the lake, ignored the weather warning, such a tragedy. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought the cold and the water would erase us. I looked at Lily, sleeping under the gray sky. I reached out and zipped her jacket up to her chin. Then I stood up and walked to the bow of the boat, staring into the white void where I knew the shore must be. They had made a calculation. They had weighed my life and my daughter's life against their debts and their greed, and they had decided we were expendable. They thought I was the quiet brother, the soft one, the one who drew pretty pictures and let Richard handle the business. I checked my watch again. 4:01. Okay, I whispered to the fog. You want me dead? You are going to have to work harder than this. I was not just an architect of buildings. I was about to become the architect of their ruin. But first I had to survive the night. The cold on the lake was biting, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in the conference room of Williams Logistics exactly 7 days ago. As I sat there on the drifting boat, staring at the white knuckles of my hands, gripping the useless steering wheel, my mind snapped back to that mahogany table, the place where my death warrant had likely been signed. It is funny how the wealthy discuss ruin. They do not scream. They do not throw things. They whisper. They use words like liquidity issues and temporary reallocation. They pour sparkling water into crystal glasses while discussing how they stole the retirement funds of 300 warehouse workers. That was the scene last Tuesday. My brother Richard, the CEO, was sitting at the head of the table. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, but he looked like a cornered animal. Sweat was beading on his upper lip, destroying the facade of the confident executive. I sat opposite him. I am an architect, not a businessman. I deal in concrete and steel things that are real. But when our grandfather passed away, he left me something that Richard despised. He left me 40% of the voting stock in the family empire. He knew Richard was reckless. He knew Richard treated the company like a personal piggy bank. So he made me the brake pedal. And last Tuesday, Richard was trying to cut the brake lines. He had slid a document across the polished wood toward me. It was thick, bound in blue legal paper. "Just sign it, Mikey," he had said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "It is a standard asset liquidation. We are pivoting, selling off the distribution centers in Nevada to free up some capital for tech investment." I had not signed it. Instead, I had opened the folder to page 20. I had done my homework. "You are not investing in tech, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "You are trying to plug a $12 million hole. I saw the internal audit. You raided the pension fund to cover your losses on those crypto futures you swore you were not touching." The silence in the room had been deafening. Richard's face had gone from pale to a blotchy red. "It is a loan, Michael. I will pay it back once the market corrects. But I need to sell the Nevada assets now to satisfy the regulators. If I do not cover that margin call by the end of the month, the SEC comes knocking. Do you want that? Do you want the family name dragged through the mud?" Then my parents had chimed in. Arthur and Margaret Williams. They sat on either side of Richard like gargoyles, guarding a crumbling cathedral. "Michael," my mother had said, her voice dripping with that weaponized disappointment she had perfected over 4 decades. "Don't be dramatic. Richard is the CEO. He knows what he is doing. You have always been so rigid, so unwilling to sacrifice for the greater good." "The greater good?" I asked, incredulous. "Mom, he stole from the workers. These are people who have been with us for 30 years. If I sign this, I am complicit in fraud. I am not signing." That was the moment. I saw it now, replaying it in the freezing fog of Silver Lake. That was the moment their eyes changed. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was calculation. My father, Arthur, had leaned forward. He was a man who believed that morality was something poor people invented to feel better about being poor. "You are jeopardizing your inheritance, Michael. You are jeopardizing Lily's future. Do you want her to grow up with a bankrupt father?" "I would rather she grow up with an honest one," I had replied, standing up. "I am not signing. And Richard, you have until the board meeting next week to put that money back, or I am going to the authorities myself." I had walked out. I felt righteous. I felt strong. I was an idiot. I should have known that you do not back a tiger into a corner and expect it to play fair. I should have realized that for people like my family, reputation is not just vanity. It is survival. They would do anything to protect it. 2 days later, the tone had shifted completely. Richard called me sounding contrite. He apologized. He said he was under stress. He said he found a legal way to bridge the loan without selling the assets. He wanted to make peace. "Let's go to the lake," he had suggested. "Just the family. Like the old days. Mom and Dad are worried about the tension. And hey, Lily's birthday is coming up. Let's celebrate early. I will rent that big cabin on the north side, the secluded one. We can disconnect." Disconnect? That word echoed in my head now, as I looked at the empty spot where the radio wires used to be. The trap was so obvious that it was painful to recall. But I had walked right into it because I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that my brother was just incompetent, not evil. I wanted to believe my parents were just enablers, not accomplices. And then there was Vanessa, Richard's wife, a woman whose primary talents involved spending money and ignoring her husband's infidelities. I remembered a conversation with her on the dock just before we boarded this death trap of a boat. She had approached me while I was helping Lily with her life jacket. Vanessa was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, clutching her designer tote bag a little too tightly. "Michael," she had asked, her voice high and jittery. "You are looking a little pale. Are you feeling okay?" "I am fine, Vanessa," I had said, distracted. "Are you sure? I know you have been under so much stress with work. Does your heart ever bother you? Richard said something about you having palpitations." I had stopped and looked at her. "I have the blood pressure of a 20-year-old athlete, Vanessa. I do not have heart problems. Dad is the one with the heart condition." Right. She had laughed nervously, avoiding my gaze. "I just worry. Did you bring any medication? Just in case. Aspirin? Beta blockers?" "No, Vanessa, I do not take medication." She had nodded, a strange look of relief washing over her face. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual scattered self. Now I understood. She was fact-checking the script. They needed to make sure I didn't have anything on me that could save a life, or perhaps they were building the narrative for the police report. He had a heart attack on the water. It was tragic. We tried to find his pills, but he didn't have any. It was a scripted murder, a play in 3 acts, and we were currently in the climax. Richard had insisted on handling everything at the cabin. He cooked the dinner. He poured the drinks. He rented the boats. He made sure we were isolated miles away from the main marina in a private cove where no one could see us board the pontoon. And the tea. God, the tea. My mother, the matriarch, the woman who had bandaged my scraped knees when I was a boy. I remembered her handing the thermos cup to Lily on the dock. "Drink up, sweetie," she had said. "It will keep you warm and stop you from getting dizzy on the waves." Lily had trusted her. I had trusted her. I looked down at my daughter now. The drug was strong. Too strong. A terrifying thought clawed at my chest. What if they had given her too much? What if they didn't care if she woke up at all? Number 1. I pushed that thought away. I could not go there. Not yet. Suddenly Lily stirred. A small whimper escaped her lips and her eyelids fluttered. I immediately dropped to my knees beside her, shielding her from the wind with my body. I forced my face into a mask of calm. I wiped the terror from my eyes and replaced it with the steady, reassuring look of a father who had everything under control. "Daddy?" Her voice was thick, slurred. She blinked, looking up at me with confused, glassy eyes. "Where are we? Why is it so quiet?" She tried to sit up, but she swayed, clutching her head. "I feel sick. My head hurts." "Easy, monkey," I said softly, using her nickname. "Lie still. You are okay." She looked around, her eyes widening as she took in the gray fog and the empty boat. "Where is Uncle Richard? Where is Grandma?" This was the moment. The truth was sitting on the tip of my tongue, acidic and burning. "Grandma poisoned you. Uncle Richard left us here to die so he can buy a yacht with stolen money." But I looked at her. She was 11. She was scared, cold, and drugged. If I told her the truth now, the panic would kill her faster than the hypothermia. She needed hope. She needed to believe that the world made sense, even if I knew it didn't. "The engine died, Lil," I lied smoothly. "Just a mechanical glitch. Uncle Richard and the others took the speedboat to go get help. The radio wasn't working, so they had to zoom back to the marina to get a tow truck for us. They left us." Her lip trembled. "Why didn't they take us with them?" "The speedboat was too full," I said, inventing the details as I went. "And you were sleeping so soundly. Grandma didn't want to wake you up and move you in the cold. They will be back any minute. They are probably just drinking hot chocolate at the lodge and waiting for the mechanic." "It is cold, Daddy," she whispered, shivering. "I know, baby. I know." I pulled her closer, rubbing her arms to generate friction. "But look, it is an adventure. Like in your books. We are explorers stranded in the Arctic." "It is scary," she said, burying her face in my chest. "I am here," I promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her beanie. "Nothing is going to hurt you while I am here." But as I held her, looking out over her shoulder into the darkening mist, the rage inside me hardened into something cold and sharp, like a blade of ice. They had used my love for my family against me. They had used my trust. They had weaponized a grandmother's tea and a brother's invitation. They thought they knew me. They thought I was the quiet architect who followed the rules. They thought that without a phone, without an engine, without a way to call my lawyer, I would just fade away into the silence of the lake. They were wrong. I thought about the layout of the cabin where we had stayed. I visualized the structural plans of the Williams Logistics headquarters, which I had helped design 10 years ago. I knew where the exits were. I knew where the load-bearing walls were. And I knew exactly how to bring the whole thing crashing down. But first, I had to keep a promise. "Lily," I said, pulling back slightly to look her in the eyes. "I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? The heater on the boat is broken too, so we have to build a fort. We are going to build the best fort ever. Are you ready?" She nodded weakly, trusting me completely. That trust was the only fuel I had left, and it was going to have to be enough to get us through the night. I stood up, my legs steady despite the rocking deck. It was time to stop waiting for a rescue that wasn't coming. It was time to start saving ourselves. The sun began to dip below the invisible horizon, and the temperature did not just drop. It plummeted. The gray mist that had been a suffocating blindfold transformed into a freezing shroud. I could feel the change on my skin, a prickling sensation that warned of the danger to come. We were not going to die of thirst, and we were not going to die of hunger. Those were problems for day 3 or day 4. Tonight, the killer was hypothermia. I looked at the pontoon boat, not as a vehicle, but as a collection of raw materials. This was what I did. I looked at a vacant lot and saw a skyscraper. I looked at a pile of steel beams and saw a skeleton. Now I looked at this floating coffin and saw a shelter. "Lily," I said, my voice sharp and commanding to cut through her grogginess. "I need you to move to the center of the deck. Sit on your life jacket. Keep your knees up." She obeyed, without question, her teeth already starting to chatter. The drug was wearing off, leaving her shivering and terrified. I went to work. I needed to create a microclimate, a pocket of dead air that could trap our body heat. The open deck was a wind tunnel. I needed to build a fortress. I moved to the rear bench seat. It was bolted to the deck, but the hinges were cheap aluminum. I didn't have tools, or so I thought. I kicked the base of the seat, testing the resistance. It was solid. I needed leverage. I frantically searched the console again, running my hands under the plastic dashboard, feeling for anything my family might have missed. My fingers brushed against a small, hard plastic box wedged between the fuse panel and the hull. I pulled it out. It was a generic orange emergency boat kit, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $20 and forget about. My heart leaped. I popped the latch. Inside there was no flare gun. Richard had likely removed that along with the radio wires. But there was a screwdriver with interchangeable heads, a small pair of pliers, and a roll of electrical tape. It was not much, but to a desperate man, it was an entire workshop. "Jackpot," I whispered. I used the screwdriver to attack the hinges of the rear bench. The screws were rusted, seizing up against the salt and moisture, but I put my entire body weight behind the turns. The metal screeched a sound that pierced the silent fog, but one by one they gave way. I disconnected the long vinyl seat cushion from its frame. It was heavy, waterlogged foam, wrapped in white leather. I dragged it to the center of the boat, placing it on its side to form a wall. I did the same with the opposite bench. Now I had 2 walls. I looked up at the bimini top. The canvas sunshade stretched over the metal frame above us. It was useless up there. I needed it down here. I used the pliers to undo the tension straps. The canvas sagged. I unscrewed the mounting brackets from the gunnels. "Daddy, what are you doing?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "I am building us a castle, Lil," I grunted, wrestling the heavy metal frame down. "Just like we used to do with the sofa cushions, remember?" I draped the canvas over the 2 bench seats I had positioned, creating a low triangular tent. I used the electrical tape to seal the gaps, where the wind might whistle through. It was ugly. It looked like a pile of trash in the middle of the lake. But when I crawled inside to check, the difference was instant. The wind was cut off. "Get inside," I told her. "All the way to the back. Curl up." She crawled into the dark, padded cave. I followed her, sealing the entrance with a life jacket. Inside, it smelled of mildew and gasoline, but it was warmer. I rubbed her arms, her back generating friction. "We are going to be okay," I lied. "This will keep us warm until morning." But I knew warmth was not enough. We were drifting. I could feel the subtle shift in the boat's movement. The gentle bobbing had turned into a slow, rhythmic lurch. The current had us. I crawled back out into the cold. The fog was denser now, turning the world into a milky twilight. I needed to signal. If there was a boat out there, if there was a ranger station on the cliffs, they needed to see us. I grabbed the dead battery from the stern. It was a heavy lead-acid block. I couldn't use it for power, but I could use its components. I used the pliers to crack open the plastic casing of the terminal covers. They were shiny, reflective lead. I took the reflective strips off the extra life jackets, tearing the stitching with my teeth. I arranged the reflectors on the highest point of the boat, the top of the console, and angled them toward where I thought the last light of the sun was fading. I tried to catch a beam to create a flash that might cut through the gloom. I waited. I adjusted the angle. I watched the gray wall of fog. Nothing happened. The mist was too thick. It scattered the light, diffusing it into a useless glow. It was like trying to signal with a candle inside a cloud. I slammed my hand against the fiberglass hull in frustration. The pain was grounding. It reminded me that I was still alive. I heard a sound from the tent. Lily was crying. Not the loud, wailing cry of a child throwing a tantrum, but the soft, hopeless sobbing of someone who knows they are trapped. I could not let her spiral. Fear consumed oxygen. Fear consumed energy. I stuck my head back into the tent. "Lily, stop. Listen to me." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I need your help," I said, my voice serious. "I cannot do this alone. I need a first officer. Can you be my first officer?" She sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Yes." "Okay. Your job is the most important one. You are the watcher. I need you to keep your eyes on the horizon. Not the water, the horizon. You look for lights. Any tiny spark. A lighthouse, a cabin, another boat. You count them. If you see one, you yell. Can you do that?" "I can try," she stammered. "Do not just try. Do it. I am counting on you." Giving her a job changed her posture. She sat up straighter. She wiped her eyes. She had a purpose now. She wasn't just a victim. She was part of the crew. I backed out again. Now came the hard part. We were drifting blind. I had checked the compass on the dash earlier. It was spinning lazily, likely broken or affected by some magnetic anomaly in the boat's wiring, but the drift felt wrong. The water was moving faster. I could hear a change in the sound of the lake. In the distance, beneath the silence, there was a low, rhythmic booming. Waves hitting rock, the cliffs. Silver Lake was not a bowl. It was a canyon filled with water. The east side was a sheer wall of granite, jagged and unforgiving. If the current smashed this aluminum can against those rocks, we would be shredded. I needed propulsion. I looked at the floor, the storage hatch I had opened earlier, to find the drone. It was a rectangular piece of heavy-duty plastic, about 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. It was hinged. I took the screwdriver and attacked the hinges. These were newer stainless steel. They came out easier. I held the hatch cover in my hand. It was a blade, but it had no handle. I looked around frantically. I needed a shaft. The boat was stripped. The bimini frame was used for the tent. Then I saw it. The support strut for the captain's chair. It was a hollow metal tube adjustable for height. I jammed the screwdriver into the locking mechanism of the chair, prying it, until the plastic snapped. I yanked the seat upward, and the top half came free, leaving the metal pedestal. I unbolted the pedestal from the floor. It was heavy, awkward, and cold. I placed the plastic hatch cover against the metal pole. I used the entire roll of electrical tape, wrapping it tighter and tighter, until the two pieces were fused together. Then, for good measure, I took the long screws I had removed from the bench seat and hammered them through the tape and plastic, wedging them into the metal holes of the pole to act as locking pins. It was crude. It was ugly. But it was a paddle. I moved to the stern, the flattest part of the deck. I knelt down, the cold immediately soaking through my jeans. I lowered my makeshift oar into the black water. It was heavy, incredibly heavy. I pulled. The boat barely moved. A pontoon is basically a floating brick. It is not designed to be rowed. It resists the water. "Come on," I gritted my teeth, pulling again. My shoulders burned. The metal pole dug into my palms, tearing the skin. But I found a rhythm. Dip, pull, lift, dip, pull, lift. I was fighting the entire weight of the lake. I was fighting the current that wanted to kill us. I was fighting the ghost of my brother, who was probably sipping scotch right now. "I see something," Lily's voice piped up from the tent. I stopped, chest-heaving, sweat freezing on my forehead. "What? Where?" "Over there, like a blinking eye." I squinted into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, just the swirling mist. Then a flash. It was faint, a dull, rhythmic pulse of yellow light. It was not on the horizon. It was low near the water. It was not a boat. It was stationary. I realized what it was. A buoy. A deep water marker. But why did it matter? It was just a hunk of metal chained to the bottom. Then my architect brain kicked in. I had read about the upgrades to the reservoir system in this county. They were installing new environmental monitoring stations. These weren't just channel markers. They were data collection points, solar-powered, remote transmitting. They had sensors. They had transmitters. And most importantly, they had a service panel. If I could get to that buoy, I could access the electronics. I could short the circuit. I could trigger a tamper alarm. A tamper alarm that would show up on a screen at the Department of Water and Power. It wouldn't go to the local police who might be in my family's pocket. It would go to the state engineers. "Good job, Lily," I shouted, adrenaline flooding my exhausted muscles. "That is it. That is our way out." But the light was to our left and the current was dragging us to the right toward the sound of the crashing waves. I looked at the oar in my bleeding hands. I looked at the distant yellow flash. I had to row across the current. I had to move this 2-ton barge against the flow of nature itself. I plunged the oar back into the water. I didn't just pull, I hauled. I screamed with the effort, a primal roar that was swallowed by the fog. Every stroke was a battle. My back muscles felt like they were tearing. My lungs burned in the freezing air. The booming of the cliffs was getting louder. The yellow light was teasing me, bobbing in and out of sight. "Keep watching it, Lily," I yelled, gasping for air. "Don't let it out of your sight. Tell me if we are getting closer." "We are turning," she cried out. "We are pointing at it." I rowed harder. I rowed until I couldn't feel my fingers. I rowed until the only thing keeping me moving was the hatred for the people who put us here. The yellow light grew brighter. I could see the silhouette of the buoy now. It was large, a conical tower, rising out of the black water. We were close. 50 yards. 30 yards. But the current was relentless. It surged, grabbing the pontoon and twisting it sideways. The oar slipped from my numb fingers and clattered against the aluminum railing, nearly falling into the abyss. I lunged and caught it just in time, but we lost momentum. We were drifting past it. "No!" I screamed. I jammed the oar back in, paddling frantically on one side to spin the boat. The bow swung around agonizingly slow. The buoy was right there, 10 feet away. 5 feet. I dropped the oar. I ran to the edge of the deck. I had one chance. I reached out with the boat hook. No, I didn't have a boat hook. I had nothing. I had to use my belt. I ripped my leather belt off my waist as I ran. I leaned over the rail as the dark metal shape of the buoy rushed past. There was a metal ring on the top, a mooring cleat. I looped the belt through the railing of the boat and held the buckle end, swinging it like a lasso. "Please," I whispered. I threw the belt. The leather strap slapped against the wet metal of the buoy. I pulled. It slipped. I lunged my body hanging halfway off the boat, the freezing water splashing my face. My hand closed around a cold, slime-covered metal rung on the side of the buoy. The momentum of the 2-ton boat hit me. My arm felt like it was being ripped out of its socket. I screamed in agony, my shoulder popping, but I did not let go. I locked my fingers. I wrapped my legs around the railing of the pontoon. I became the rope. I became the anchor. The boat groaned, shuddered, and then miraculously swung around. We stopped. We were tethered. Not to the shore, but to a floating sentinel in the middle of nowhere. I pulled myself back onto the deck, collapsing in a heap, gasping for air, clutching my shoulder. The buoy bobbed gently next to us, the yellow light flashing rhythmically above my head like a heartbeat. I looked up at the sensor array on top of the buoy, a small box with an antenna. I had caught the lifeline. Now, I just had to figure out how to make it scream. The leather belt, my lifeline to the only solid object in this liquid hell, did not just break. It disintegrated under the tension. The torque of a 2-ton pontoon boat, caught in a violent cross-current, was simply too much for a strip of cowhide. The buckle snapped with a sound like a pistol shot, whipping back and slicing my cheek before vanishing into the gloom. In an instant, the yellow light of the buoy, which I had fought so hard to reach, was ripped away from us. The darkness swallowed it whole, as the current seized the boat again, dragging us backward with renewed fury. I scrambled across the deck, shouting in frustration, but it was physics. It was mass and velocity, and I had neither on my side. Then came the impact. It was not a thud. It was a screeching, tearing grinder of a noise that vibrated through the soles of my shoes and up into my teeth. The boat had found the submerged teeth of the eastern cliff face. The pontoon shuddered violently, throwing me against the railing. I heard the sickening sound of aluminum ripping open, followed immediately by the hiss of escaping air and the rush of water. The deck tilted, sharply. "Daddy!" Lily screamed from inside our makeshift tent. I scrambled up the listing deck, fighting gravity. "I am here, Lily! I am coming!" I ripped open the canvas. Lily was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with absolute terror. The boat was groaning the port side pontoon, rapidly taking on water. We were not just stranded anymore, we were sinking. The angle was already 20 degrees and increasing. In 5 minutes, this platform would be vertical. In 10, it would be gone. I looked out into the blackness. The fog had thinned just enough for me to see the yellow pulse of the weather buoy. It was our only chance, but it was far. 200 meters, maybe more. In a heated pool, 200 meters is a warm-up. In a lake where the water temperature is hovering around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 200 meters is a death sentence. The cold shock response alone could stop a heart. But staying here was 0% survival. Swimming was maybe 10%. I grabbed the longest bench cushion, the one I had used for the wall of our fort. It was thick foam wrapped in vinyl. It was buoyant. "Lily, listen to me," I said, my voice eerily calm. I grabbed a coil of nylon rope from the emergency kit I had found earlier. "We are going for a swim, but you are not going to swim. You are going to ride." "I can't, it is too cold," she sobbed, shrinking back. "You have to." I grabbed her shoulders, perhaps a little too hard. "The boat is going under, Lil. We have to go, now." I tied the rope around her waist, securing it with a bowline knot. The king of knots, one that would not slip under pressure. I tied the other end to the strap of the cushion. Then, I tied a second length of rope from the cushion to my own belt loop. "Lie on the cushion," I commanded. "On your stomach. Wrap your arms around it. Do not let go. Do not touch the water if you can help it." She was trembling so hard, her teeth were clicking like castanets, but she climbed onto the white vinyl rectangle. The boat gave another lurch, dipping lower. The water was lapping at my ankles now. "Ready," I whispered. 1, 2, 3. I pushed the cushion over the side and jumped into the black void. The cold hit me like a sledgehammer. It was instantaneous and paralyzing. It felt less like water, and more like being encased in concrete. My lungs seized. I gasped, sucking in air, my body screaming at me to get out, to flee, to die. For 10 seconds, I could not move. I just bobbed there, hyperventilating, feeling the heat being sucked out of my core, as if a vampire were draining my blood. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was small, terrified, floating above me. Her voice broke the paralysis. I forced my legs to kick. I forced my arms to stroke. I positioned myself behind the cushion, gripping the straps, and began to kick. I became the engine for her life raft. The water was black oil. I could not see my own hands. I could only see the rhythmic flash of the yellow light in the distance. 200 meters. Kick, kick, kick. The first 50 meters were adrenaline. My body was burning through its glucose reserves, fighting the freeze. I kept my head up, eyes locked on the light. But by the 100-meter mark, the cold began to win. My fingers started to curl into claws, refusing to straighten. My legs felt heavy, as if I were dragging lead weights. The shivering started, violent, uncontrollable spasms that shook my entire frame, making it hard to keep a rhythm. "Just stop," a voice in my head whispered. "It is so warm just to sleep. Just let go." My face dipped below the surface. The water filled my nose. I coughed, sputtering, panic flaring in my chest. I looked at the cushion. Lily was lying there, freezing, terrified, depending entirely on the fact that her father was invincible. Then I saw them. In the darkness of my mind, I saw the fireplace at the cabin. I saw Richard raising a glass of expensive scotch. I saw my mother laughing, her head thrown back. I saw my father checking his watch, calculating how long it would take for the accident to be confirmed so he could access the trust fund. They were warm. They were safe. They were probably discussing what color flowers to buy for my closed casket service. They thought I was weak. They thought Michael, the sensitive architect, the one who cried at movies, the one who always compromised, would just fade away quietly. A roar built up in my throat. It was not a sound. It was a fire. They tried to kill my daughter. The rage hit my bloodstream like a shot of pure methamphetamine. It overrode the cold. It overrode the biology. "No!" I grunted, kicking harder. I thrashed against the water, tearing at it with my numb hands. I was not swimming toward safety anymore. I was swimming toward revenge. Every stroke was a promise. I will survive. I will return. I will make you pay. The yellow light grew larger. The silhouette of the buoy loomed above us, a dark metal tower rocking in the swell. 10 meters. 5 meters. I reached out and my hand struck cold steel. I grabbed the maintenance ladder welded to the side of the buoy. "Lily!" I gasped, my voice raw. "Grab the ladder! Climb!" She scrambled off the cushion, her limbs stiff, slipping on the wet rungs. I shoved her upward, using the last ounce of strength in my arms to push her until she tumbled onto the metal grating of the platform. I tried to pull myself up, but my body failed. My arms were useless noodles. I hung there, half in the water, the darkness tugging at my legs. "Daddy!" Lily reached down, grabbing my coat collar with her small hands. I looked at her face. I looked at the fire in her eyes. It mirrored mine. With a scream that tore my throat, I hauled myself up, rolling onto the harsh metal grate. We lay there for a moment, two heaps of wet clothes shivering in the wind. But we were out of the water. The buoy was small, barely 6 feet across. In the center was the equipment housing. I crawled toward it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control them. I needed to send a signal. The sensor array was protected by a heavy plastic dome. I didn't have tools. I didn't have codes. I sat up, grabbed a heavy metal locking pin that hung from a chain on the railing and smashed it against the plastic housing. Crack. I hit it again, and again, channeling every ounce of my hatred into the blows. The plastic shattered. I reached inside, grabbing handfuls of wires and circuit boards. I ripped them out. I crushed the delicate sensors. I wasn't trying to fix it. I was trying to kill it. These systems are designed with fail-safe protocols. If a sensor goes dark, it's a maintenance issue. But if a sensor sends a catastrophic stream of garbage data, erratic voltage, impossible wind speeds, hardware faults, it triggers a priority alarm. It screams malfunction to the central grid. I smashed it until the yellow light stopped blinking and turned into a solid, angry red. Then we waited. That wait was harder than the swim. We huddled together against the metal box wrapped in the wet life jackets I had managed to salvage. I held Lily so tight, I thought I might crush her. I told her stories. I told her about the house we would build one day. I told her about the puppy we would get. I kept her talking to ensure she didn't slip into the sleep of hypothermia. 1 hour, 2 hours. The cold had seeped into my organs. My vision was tunneling. I knew, medically speaking, we were nearing the end. Then I heard it. A hum. It wasn't the wind. It was a diesel engine. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. I dragged myself to the railing. A spotlight swept across the water, cutting through the fog like a divine sword. "Here!" I croaked. It was barely a whisper. "Here!" The light swung past us, then snapped back. It blinded me. The boat that emerged from the mist was not a Coast Guard cutter or a police interceptor. It was a sturdy, beat-up workboat with the logo of the Department of Natural Resources on the side. A man in a thick yellow raincoat was at the helm. He maneuvered the boat alongside the buoy with practiced ease. He looked annoyed, likely expecting to find a bird nest jamming the sensors. When he saw 2 humans clinging to the metal grate, his jaw dropped. "Holy Mother of God!" he shouted, killing the engine and rushing to the gunwale. He reached out his strong hands, grabbing Lily first, hoisting her onto his deck as if she weighed nothing. Then he grabbed me. It took both of us to get my frozen body over the rail. I collapsed onto the warm, vibrating deck of the workboat. The heat from the engine vent washed over me, the most beautiful feeling I had ever experienced. The ranger, a man with a gray beard and a name tag that read Hank, was immediately covering us with heavy wool blankets. "I am calling this in," Hank said, reaching for his radio mic. "Station, this is Unit 4. I have 2 survivors at Buoy Delta." I shot my hand out. It was weak trembling, but I gripped his wrist with a desperation that startled him. "No," I wheezed. Hank looked down at me confused. "Buddy, you are freezing to death. I need to get a medevac." "No public radio," I rasped, staring into his eyes, willing him to understand. "My family are listening." "They did this." Hank froze. He looked at the wreckage of a man before him, then at the terrified little girl. He saw the bruises. He saw the terror that had nothing to do with the cold. "Please," I whispered, my teeth chattering. "Call the state police. Not the local sheriff. Not the deputies. State only. My family, they own this town. If you call it in on the open channel, we are dead." It was a gamble. I was asking a stranger to believe a conspiracy theory in the middle of the night. Hank looked at the radio, then back at me. He saw something in my eyes. Maybe it was the clarity of my fear. Maybe it was the determination. He slowly put the microphone back on the hook. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a personal cell phone. "You are lucky I get 1 bar of service out here," Hank grumbled. He dialed a number, turning his back to the wind. "Yeah, dispatch? This is Hank. Connect me to the state troopers barracks in Olympia. Yeah, direct line. I have a situation that requires discretion." I let my head fall back against the deck. The tears finally came hot and stinging. "Where are we taking you?" Hank asked after he hung up. "The main hospital is 20 miles south." "No," I said. "Too big. Too many people. They will find us." "There is a small urgent care clinic in Forks," Hank suggested, revving the engine. "My cousin runs the night shift. It is off the grid mostly for loggers." "Take us there," I said, closing my eyes. "And Hank?" "Yeah?" "Drive fast." As the boat surged forward, cutting through the black water, toward a sanctuary I prayed was real, I realized that the hardest part was not the swim. The hardest part was just beginning. I had survived the lake. Now I had to survive the resurrection. While I was lying on a cot in a small, hidden urgent care clinic in Forks, shivering uncontrollably as warm saline was pumped into my veins, my family was hard at work. They were not working on a search party. They were not printing missing person flyers. They were working on a script. It is often said that the first 24 hours of a missing person case are critical. My brother Richard agreed completely. He knew they were critical for establishing the narrative that would save his skin and secure his fortune. Through the investigative files I later obtained, and the surveillance footage I watched with my own eyes, I can reconstruct exactly what the Williams family was doing while my daughter and I were fighting for our lives on that buoy. At 10 o'clock at night, exactly around the time Hank was pulling my frozen body out of the water, Richard was sitting in the library of the rental cabin. He was not on the phone with the Coast Guard. He was on the phone with Jonathan Sterling, the family's high-priced crisis management lawyer. Richard was pacing the room. I could imagine the glass of scotch in his hand. He was dictating the press release that would be issued the moment my body was found. Subject: Michael Williams. Age 42. Status: unstable. That was the angle. They were not just going to kill me. They were going to assassinate my character to ensure no one asked questions. They needed a reason for why a loving father would take his daughter onto a freezing lake in a boat with no fuel. "We need to emphasize the depression," Richard had told the lawyer. "Ever since his wife died, he has been erratic. Make sure the statement says he was talking about joining her. Make it sound poetic, Jonathan. The public eats that tragic romance garbage up." While Richard was handling the legal fiction, my mother Margaret was handling the practical theater. She had gone down to the marina office late that evening around 11 o'clock. She made a scene that would have won her an Academy Award. She grabbed the night manager's arm, her eyes perfectly rimmed with tears. "Have you seen my son? He took the boat out hours ago. He was acting so strange. He was muttering to himself. I told him not to go, but he just grabbed poor Lily and dragged her onto the pontoon." She was planting the seeds of the insanity defense. She was creating witnesses who would remember a distraught mother, not a cold-blooded accomplice who had drugged her own granddaughter's tea. And then there was Dr. Vance, a man who had taken an oath to do no harm, but who had evidently decided that the oath did not apply when 5 figures were transferred into his offshore account. At midnight, he was logging into his practice's secure server, backdating entries in my medical file. He was creating a history of psychosis, of prescription drug abuse, of suicidal ideation that had never existed. He was building a paper trail that said, Michael Williams was a ticking time bomb. They were thorough. They were professional. They were vultures in silk suits, picking the flesh off my bones before I was even legally dead. But they made one miscalculation. They assumed the local sheriff, a man named Miller, who owed Richard gambling debts, would be the one handling the case. They assumed that when the accident was reported, Miller would nod, file the paperwork, and close the book. They did not account for Hank. And they certainly did not account for the Washington State Police. The sun rose on a gray, drizzly morning. Inside the state police station in the neighboring county, I sat in a darkened observation room. I was wrapped in 3 wool blankets, clutching a mug of hot coffee with both hands to stop the tremors. Beside me, Lily was asleep on a makeshift bed of coats, guarded by a female officer who looked ready to shoot anyone who woke her up. My eyes were glued to the monitor on the wall. It showed the interrogation room, known as Box 1. "Are you sure you want to watch this, Mr. Williams?" the detective asked me. He was a sharp-eyed man named Detective Reynolds. He had listened to my story at 3 in the morning, skeptical at first, until he saw the bruises on Lily's arms and heard the terror in her voice. Then he had become very interested in the Williams family. "I have to see it," I said, my voice raspy. "I need to see their faces." At 8 o'clock in the morning, the trap was sprung. Detective Reynolds had sent a team to the luxury cabin. They did not arrest anyone, not yet. They played the part of the concerned authorities. They knocked on the door, and asked the family to come down to the station to assist with the search coordination and to identify some potential debris. The family arrived in a black SUV: Richard, Vanessa, Arthur, and Margaret. They were dressed in somber colors. Margaret was clutching a handkerchief. Richard looked grave and serious. They looked like a grieving family. It was sickening. I watched on the screen as they were ushered into the conference room. They thought they were in charge. They thought they were about to speak to Sheriff Miller. Instead, Detective Reynolds walked in. He was not wearing the beige uniform of the sheriff's department. He was wearing the dark blue of the state police. I saw Richard's eyes flicker. He noticed the uniform change immediately, a tiny crack in his composure. "Where is Sheriff Miller?" Richard asked, his tone slightly too aggressive for a worried brother. "We have a rapport with him." "This is a state matter now, sir," Reynolds said smoothly, taking a seat opposite them. "Given the potential cross-jurisdictional issues with the lake currents. But do not worry. We are putting all our resources into finding your brother." "Finding him?" my father, Arthur, asked. "So he is still missing." Reynolds paused. He looked at a file folder on the table. He did not open it. He just rested his hand on it. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. It was a classic interrogation tactic. Make them fill the silence. "We found the boat," Reynolds said finally. He did not say, "We found the bodies." He did not say, "We found survivors." He just said, "We found the boat." On the screen, I saw the reaction ripple through them. Vanessa let out a gasp, covering her mouth. It looked rehearsed. Margaret sobbed, burying her face in Arthur's shoulder. "Oh, my poor boy! My poor Lily!" But Richard did not cry. He leaned forward. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was calculating the odds. If they found the boat, they found the wreckage. If the boat was wrecked against the cliffs, the bodies would be battered, perhaps unidentifiable immediately. "The boat?" Richard asked. "Was it intact?" "It was smashed against the eastern cliffs," Reynolds said, keeping his face completely neutral. "Total structural failure. It looks like it hit the rocks with significant force." "And the occupants?" Richard asked. "We have divers in the water," Reynolds said. "But the currents there are vicious. It is a recovery operation now, not a rescue." This was the lie. The bait. Reynolds was telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. That I was dead. That the plan had worked. I saw the tension leave Richard's shoulders. He slumped back in his chair, not in grief, but in relief. He exchanged a quick, imperceptible glance with my father. "It is done." Then Richard made his move. He thought he was safe. He thought he was just tying up loose ends. "This is devastating," Richard said, rubbing his eyes without shedding a tear. "Truly devastating. I just need to know about the logistics, for the coroner. Did you find anything else on the boat? Personal effects?" "Like what?" Reynolds asked. "Well," Richard hesitated, then plunged ahead. "My brother was carrying important documents. He was paranoid lately. He carried his identification, his legal papers. Did you find a briefcase or a wallet? We need to know if his ID was recovered to formally identify the remains." I gasped in the observation room. Reynolds didn't miss it either. "The will?" he asked softly. "You are asking about his will? We haven't even confirmed a body yet, Mr. Williams." Richard turned pale. He realized he had stepped on a landmine. "I meant his wishes. He left a note. We think he left a note. About his final wishes. I just want to respect them." "A note?" Reynolds leaned in. "You think this was suicide?" "He was very depressed," Margaret chimed in, her voice shaking. "He took pills. Dr. Vance can confirm it. He was not in his right mind." "Interesting," Reynolds said. He opened the file folder. "Because we did find something on the boat. We found a drone." Richard froze. "A drone?" "Yes. A child's toy. It was jammed under the seat. The SD card was intact." I watched the blood drain from 4 faces simultaneously. They knew Lily always filmed, but they thought the drone was lost or broken or irrelevant. "What was on it?" Vanessa whispered. Reynolds smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "We are analyzing it now. But I am curious. If your brother was depressed and took the boat out to kill himself, why did our forensic analysis of the fuel tank show that it had been siphoned empty before the boat left the dock?" Silence. Absolute terrified silence. Richard stood up. "I think we are done here. We are grieving. If you have questions, talk to our lawyer. Come on, Dad." "Sit down, Richard," Reynolds said. It wasn't a request. "Am I under arrest?" Richard challenged, trying to regain his authority. "Because if I am not, I am walking out that door." "You are not under arrest," Reynolds said. "Yet," Richard sneered. "Then I am leaving, and I will have your badge for harassment." He turned to the door. In the observation room, I stood up. I walked to the door that connected the viewing room to the interrogation room. "Mr. Williams," the officer guarding me said warningly, "you are supposed to stay hidden." "No," I said, putting my hand on the doorknob. "They think they are fighting a ghost. It is time they learned that ghosts can bite." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, just as Richard yanked the interrogation room door open from the inside. We stood face to face. The look on his face was worth every second of freezing in that lake. It wasn't just shock. It was a total cognitive collapse. His brain could not process the image before him. I was pale. I was covered in blankets. I looked like a corpse that had clawed its way out of the grave. "Hello, Richard," I said. My voice was quiet, dead calm. He stumbled back, hitting the doorframe. "Mike? You are..." "Dead?" I finished for him. "Not quite." I looked past him into the room where my parents and Vanessa were sitting. My mother let out a scream that sounded like a banshee. My father clutched his chest, his face turning gray. "I heard you were looking for my will," I said, stepping closer to Richard until I could smell the expensive cologne that failed to mask the scent of his fear. "Don't worry. I am going to write a new one. And I promise you, brother, you are not going to be in it." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Detective Reynolds, then at me, then at the hallway, realizing there was nowhere to run. "Get them out of my sight," I said to Reynolds, not breaking eye contact with my brother. "Before I forget that I am a civilized man." As the officers moved in to separate us, I saw the realization hit Richard. He hadn't just failed to kill me. He had handed me the murder weapon, and I was about to use it to bludgeon his entire world into dust. The confrontation in the hallway of the police station had been a tactical nuclear strike, but the war was far from over. I knew my family. I knew that even as they were being ushered out of the station, shocked and pale, their survival instincts were already kicking in. They would not give up. They would regroup, rewrite the script, and try to bury me again. Not in a lake this time, but in a padded room. Detective Reynolds offered to keep us in protective custody, but I shook my head. A jail cell, even a safe one, looked too much like a cage. If I hid, I looked guilty. If I hid, I looked like the unstable, paranoid man they were painting me to be. "No," I told Reynolds, standing up and shedding the heavy wool blankets. "I need to make a phone call, and then I need to go to the hospital." "The hospital?" Reynolds asked, raising an eyebrow. "You just refused medical attention." "I am not going there to get treated," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "I am going there to perform." I borrowed Reynolds' desk phone and dialed a number I had memorized 15 years ago. Elena Rodriguez. We had survived architecture school together before she realized she hated buildings and loved the law. Now she was the kind of attorney who ate corporate fixers for breakfast. She picked up on the second ring. "Rodriguez." "Elena," I said. "It is Michael. Don't speak. Just listen. I have about 3 minutes before my family tries to have me committed involuntarily." I gave her the bullet points: the lake, the drug tea, the siphoned fuel, the forged medical records Dr. Vance was currently uploading. "I need you to freeze everything," I commanded. "File an emergency injunction against my medical records. Block Dr. Vance. And most importantly, I need a judge to sign a wiretap warrant for Richard's phone. I have probable cause. The state police have a drone recording of him tampering with the boat." "Michael," Elena's voice was sharp professional. "If they file a 5,150 hold on you, claiming you are a danger to yourself, I cannot stop the police from taking you in. It is a 72-hour hold." "That is why I am going to St. Jude's Hospital right now," I said. "They are holding a press conference there. They are going to spin my survival as a mental breakdown miracle. I need you to meet me there, and Elena, bring the warrant." "I am on my way," she said. "Don't do anything stupid." "I am done being stupid," I said. "I am going to be a loving son." I hung up. I looked at Lily. She was awake, watching me with eyes that had seen too much for an 11-year-old. "We have to act one more time, Lil," I said, kneeling in front of her. "We are going to see Grandma and Uncle Richard, but I need you to promise me something. No matter what I say, no matter how weird I act, you have to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded. "Are we going to trick them?" "Yes," I smiled grimly. "We are going to trick them." We arrived at St. Jude's Medical Center 40 minutes later in the back of an unmarked police cruiser. The scene was exactly as I had predicted. The media vans were parked in a semicircle around the main entrance. The Williams family knew how to play the press. They had likely claimed that my father, Arthur, had suffered chest pains from the shock of the news, giving them a sympathetic reason to be at the hospital and a perfect backdrop to address the cameras. I could see them on the steps. Richard was at the podium, looking solemn and statesmanlike. My mother was next to him, dabbing her eyes. My father was in a wheelchair, looking frail. They were painting a masterpiece of grief. "My brother Michael," Richard was saying into the microphones, his voice cracking with practiced emotion, "is a troubled man. We are overjoyed that he is physically safe, but we ask for privacy as we help him navigate his severe mental health crisis. The delusions, the erratic behavior, it has been a long road." He was setting the trap. If I ran out screaming accusations, I proved him right. If I attacked him, I proved him right. I turned to Detective Reynolds in the driver's seat. "Let us out here, and keep your recording device running." I opened the car door, and I didn't straighten my clothes. I didn't comb my hair. I let the exhaustion, the fear, and the trauma hang off me like a heavy coat. I grabbed Lily's hand. "Showtime," I whispered. We walked through the crowd of reporters. Someone shouted, "That is him! That is Michael Williams!" The cameras swiveled. A wall of flashbulbs went off, blinding white explosions in the gray morning. Richard stopped mid-sentence. He looked up. His eyes went wide. He had just seen me at the station, but he hadn't expected this. He expected me to be dragged away by men in white coats. He didn't expect me to walk onto his stage. The silence that fell over the family was absolute. It was the silence of people watching a bomb land at their feet and waiting for the timer to tick down. I dropped Lily's hand and ran. I didn't run at Richard. I ran at my mother. "Mom!" I screamed, my voice breaking into a high, hysterical sob. "Mom, you are here!" I threw my arms around Margaret Williams. I felt her stiffen. She was like a statue. She smelled of expensive perfume and fear. She didn't know what to do. If she pushed me away, she looked cold. If she hugged me back, she was embracing the man she tried to kill. "I was so scared, Mom," I wailed, burying my face in her shoulder, making sure the microphones picked up every word. "The engine just died. It was so cold. I thought we were going to die out there. I prayed you would come back for us." It was the performance of a lifetime. I wasn't the accuser. I was the confused, traumatized victim. I was the son who simply couldn't believe his family would hurt him. The crowd ate it up. A collective awe went through the reporters. Margaret awkwardly patted my back, her hand trembling. There, Michael. You are safe now." I pulled back, tears streaming down my face. Tears I summoned by thinking about how much I hated them. I turned to my father. "Dad," I choked out. "I am sorry I lost the boat. I tried to paddle. I really tried." Arthur looked like he was about to vomit. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just nodded, his lips pale. Then I turned to Richard. He was standing frozen at the podium. He looked terrified. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was waiting for me to scream, "You cut the wires!" I walked up to him. I opened my arms. "Richard," I sobbed. "Thank God you were safe. When I saw the speedboat leave, I thought maybe you guys were in trouble too. I was so worried about you." I hugged him. I felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was rigid, his muscles locked in a fight-or-flight response. He had to hug me back. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching the reunion of the Williams brothers. He slowly, reluctantly wrapped his arms around me. "I am glad you are okay, Mike," he stammered, his voice loud enough for the press. I leaned in close. My face was buried in his neck, hidden from the cameras. I shifted my grip, digging my fingers into his expensive suit jacket. And then I dropped the mask. Just for him. "I know what you did to the fuel line, Richard," I whispered into his ear. My voice was a low, guttural growl, sharp as a razor. "And, Richard, you are sloppy. You left your pliers under the console. The yellow ones with your initials carved in the handle. I have them in my pocket." It was a lie. I didn't have his pliers. I didn't even know if he used pliers with his initials. But I knew Richard. He was a narcissist. He put his mark on everything. And he was arrogant enough to bring his own tools because he didn't trust the rental kit. I felt him flinch. A violent, physical jerk. "I am going to give them to the police, Richard," I whispered, continuing the hug. "Unless you have a really good lawyer." I pulled back, switching instantly back to the weeping brother. "Oh, Richard, it is just so good to see you." I stepped away, wiping my eyes. I grabbed Lily, who had rushed up to hug Grandma, with a look of pure betrayal masked as relief. Richard looked like he had been shot in the gut. His face was gray. Sweat was pouring down his forehead. Richard stammered into the microphone. "I need a moment. The emotion is too much." He stumbled away from the podium. He didn't go to his parents. He didn't go to his wife. He walked straight toward the side exit of the hospital entrance, pulling his phone out of his pocket with shaking hands. I watched him go. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was panicking. He was going to call his cleaner, the guy he paid to dispose of sensitive problems. He was going to tell him to find the pliers. He was going to incriminate himself. I looked across the crowd. Standing near a police cruiser was Elena. She was holding a manila folder. She caught my eye and nodded. She tapped her ear. She was listening. I sat down on the hospital steps, pulling Lily onto my lap. The reporters were shouting questions. "How did you survive? What happened on the lake?" "I just want to go home," I said to the cameras, my voice weak. "I just want to be with my family." My mother looked down at me. For a second, her mask slipped, and I saw the pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. She knew I was playing them. She knew I had just put Richard in a box. But she couldn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, 50 feet away around the corner of the building, Richard was holding his phone to his ear, his voice hissing into the receiver. "It is me," Richard was saying. I couldn't hear him, but I knew the script. "You need to get to the boat, the wreckage. No, listen to me. He said he found the pliers, the yellow ones. You have to find them before the cops do. I don't care if you have to dive. Just get them." He didn't know that every word was being recorded by the Washington State Police Technical Unit, parked down the street. He didn't know that by mentioning the pliers, specific identifiable pliers, he was confirming that he had been the one to sabotage the boat. He was confirming premeditation. He was confirming knowledge of the crime scene. I watched him come back around the corner a minute later. He looked slightly more composed, thinking he had handled the crisis. He adjusted his tie. He forced a smile for the cameras. He had no idea that he had just signed his own confession. "We are going to take Michael to our private estate," my father announced to the press, trying to regain control. "He needs rest and familiar surroundings." "Actually," a sharp voice cut through the air. Elena stepped forward. She was wearing a tailored black suit that looked like armor. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking on the pavement like gunshots. She handed a paper to my father and another to the police officer standing guard. "I am Elena Rodriguez, representing Michael Williams," she announced. "And this is an emergency protective order granted by Judge Miller 10 minutes ago. It prohibits Arthur Margaret Richard and Vanessa Williams from having any contact with my client or his daughter. It also grants Michael temporary sole custody of Lily Williams pending a criminal investigation." "Criminal investigation?" Vanessa shrieked. "This is ridiculous. He is sick." "No," Elena said, turning to face the cameras. "He is the only sane person here. And if you try to force him into a car, I will have you arrested for kidnapping." The flashbulbs went wild. The narrative had shattered. The grieving family was now the accused family. I looked up at Richard. He was staring at me, and for the first time he realized that the brother he had left to die in the lake had not just come back. He had come back to take everything. "Shall we go, Michael?" Elena asked, extending a hand. I stood up, holding Lily tight. I looked at my mother one last time. "Thanks for the tea, Mom," I said, loud enough for only her to hear. "But I prefer coffee." I walked down the steps, leaving the wolves trapped in the glare of the lights, while the invisible noose I had placed around Richard's neck began to tighten. The war for my life had ended on the lake, but the war for my daughter's life began 48 hours later, in a fluorescent-lit courtroom in downtown Seattle. My family realized that their attempt to paint me as a tragic accident victim had failed the moment I walked out of St. Jude's Hospital. Richard's slip-up on the phone regarding the pliers was a timed bomb that Elena and the state police were holding in reserve, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. But the Williams family was not going to wait for the explosion. They pivoted with the terrifying speed of a predator that realizes its ambush has failed and decides to simply overpower its prey. They could not kill me anymore, so they decided to kill my credibility. They filed an emergency motion with the family court alleging that I was suffering from an acute psychotic break. They claimed that the accident on the lake was actually a murder-suicide attempt orchestrated by me, and that I was in immediate danger to Lily. Their demand was simple and brutal: immediate emergency custody of Lily, to be granted to her grandparents, Arthur and Margaret Williams. The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. Judge Harrigan sat on the bench, a man known for his impatience and his tendency to favor stable family units with high net worths. My parents looked the part of the stable, concerned grandparents perfectly. Margaret was wearing a modest navy suit, her face washed clean of makeup to show her worry lines. Arthur sat in his wheelchair, looking like a frail patriarch trying to save his lineage. Their lawyer, a shark named Baxter, who cost $800 an hour, stood up to present their opening argument. "Your Honor," Baxter said, his voice smooth as silk, "we are not here to villainize Mr. Williams. We are here to save him. The facts are undeniable. This is a man who has never recovered from the death of his wife 3 years ago. He has become isolated, paranoid, and now he has dragged a terrified 11-year-old girl into a dangerous situation on a freezing lake." Baxter walked to the evidence table. "We have submitted into evidence a series of text messages sent by Michael Williams to his brother Richard over the past 3 years. They paint a disturbing picture." He projected the images onto the screen. I stared at them, my blood turning to ice. They were real messages, but they had been surgically excised from their context. Message 1 dated 2 years ago. "I do not think I can do this anymore. I just want to be with her." Context: I was talking about living in our old house where everything reminded me of my late wife. I wanted to move. They made it sound like I wanted to die. Message 2, dated 6 months ago. Lily would be better off without me dragging her down. Context. I had the flu and missed her piano recital. I was feeling guilty. They made it sound like I was planning to abandon her. These are the words of a man on the edge, Your Honor, Baxter intoned. A man who finally snapped. We believe he disabled the boat himself to end it all. The fact that he survived is a miracle, but we cannot rely on miracles to protect this child. We ask that Lily be placed in the custody of her grandparents immediately. The judge looked at me. I could see the doubt in his eyes. The narrative was compelling, the grief-stricken widower snapping. It was a story people understood. It was a story that made sense. Then came the second phase of their attack, the interview. Because of the emergency nature of the hearing, a court-appointed social worker had interviewed Lily that morning in a private room. Her name was Miss Gentry. I had met her for 5 seconds in the hallway, and the smell of my mother's favorite perfume, Chanel No. 5, clinging to her coat, told me everything I needed to know. The Williams family had reached her, maybe not with a direct bribe, but with influence. A donation to her agency, a promise of her promotion. Ms. Gentry took the stand. She adjusted her glasses, looking everywhere except at me. Ms. Gentry, Baxter asked, you spoke with the child Lily Williams this morning? I did, she replied. And what was her demeanor? She was terrified, Gentry said. She was shaking. She kept looking at the door as if she expected someone to burst in. Did she say anything about the events on the lake? Gentry nodded. She was very confused. She said her father was acting weird before the boat broke down. She said he made her hide under cushions. She said he was talking to people who were not there. I gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood creaked. That was a lie. A flat-out malicious lie. Lily would never say that. She also mentioned, Gentry continued her voice, lowering for dramatic effect, that she missed her grandmother. She asked if she could go home to her grandmother's house because she felt safe there. The courtroom murmured. My mother let out a soft, heartbroken sob from the gallery. It was perfect. They had turned my own daughter into a witness against me. Elena put her hand on my arm. Her grip was iron. Wait, she whispered. Let them finish digging the grave. Your witness, Baxter said, looking smug. Elena stood up. She didn't walk to the podium. She walked to the center of the room. She didn't look at Ms. Gentry. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, Elena said. Ms. Gentry claims to have had a detailed conversation with Lily Williams. However, we have a problem with that testimony. And what is that, Ms. Rodriguez? The judge asked, looking annoyed. The problem is that Lily Williams did not speak to Ms. Gentry, Elena said calmly. Objection, Baxter shouted. I have the interview transcript right here. You have a work of fiction, Elena countered. Because I advised my client to give his daughter very specific instructions. Instructions that a frightened, smart little girl followed to the letter. Elena turned to the bailiff. Please bring in the child. The side door opened. A female police officer walked in, holding Lily's hand. Lily looked small in her oversized sweater, but her chin was up. She looked at me, and I gave her a tiny nod. Brave girl. Lily, the judge said, his tone softening. You do not have to be scared. Did you talk to that lady there? He pointed to Ms. Gentry. Lily looked at Ms. Gentry with a cold, clear gaze that belonged to an adult. She talked to me, Lily said clearly. She told me that my daddy was sick. She told me that if I wanted to help him, I had to say he was acting crazy. She said if I said that I could get a new pony. The silence in the courtroom was sudden and absolute. Ms. Gentry turned the color of ash. She offered you a pony? The judge asked, leaning forward. Yes, Lily said, but I didn't say anything to her. Daddy told me the rule. What rule? The judge asked. I only tell the truth to people wearing blue uniforms, Lily said, pointing to the police officer beside her. "Because the people in regular clothes might be working for Uncle Richard. So I sat there and didn't say a word. I just hummed a song in my head until she stopped talking." "Your Honor!" Baxter sputtered. "This is coaching. The father has brainwashed the child." "It is not brainwashing, it is survival," Elena snapped. "And we can prove why it was necessary." Ms. Gentry just perjured herself. She invented a conversation that never happened because she was paid to deliver a result. "Do you have evidence of this corruption?" the judge asked, his eyes narrowing at Ms. Gentry. "We will handle Ms. Gentry in criminal court," Elena said. "But right now we are here to address the custody of Lily Williams. The petitioners claim Michael Williams is paranoid. They claim the drugging and the sabotage are delusions. They claim they left the lake because they thought Michael and Lily were behind them in another boat." Elena walked back to our table and picked up a small plastic bag. Inside was a pink smartwatch with a cracked screen. "This is Lily's watch," Elena said. "Michael Williams bought it for her 2 weeks ago. It has a cellular connection, a heart rate monitor, and a GPS tracker. The family didn't know she was wearing it because Michael told her to wear it on her ankle, under her thick socks, specifically because he feared for her safety." I saw Richard shift in his seat. He knew about phones. He knew about drones. He had forgotten about the Internet of Things. "We downloaded the telemetry data an hour ago," Elena said. "I would like to show the court 2 graphs." She placed a document on the projector. "Graph A," Elena said. "This is Lily's heart rate. At 10 o'clock in the morning, it was a normal 80 beats per minute. At 10:30, exactly 20 minutes after Margaret Williams gave her a cup of tea on the dock, her heart rate spiked to 140 beats per minute, then plummeted to 45 beats per minute. That is not motion sickness. That is a reaction to a high dose of benzodiazepines. We have a toxicologist standing by to testify that this pattern matches an overdose of sedatives." Margaret let out a gasp. She wasn't acting this time. She was realizing that her special tea had left a digital footprint. "And now Graph B," Elena continued. "This is the GPS data." A map of Silver Lake appeared on the screen. A blue line showed our pontoon boat moving out to the middle of the lake and then stopping. "The blue dot is Michael and Lily," Elena explained. "Stationary, drifting. But here," she pointed to a second line this one read. "This red line is the GPS trace from the family's rental speedboat. We subpoenaed the rental company's logs this morning. All their modern boats have trackers for insurance purposes." The red line moved away from the dock. It sped out toward the middle of the lake. It stopped right next to the blue line. "This is where they dropped them off," Elena said. Then the red line moved away. But it didn't go back to the marina. "Watch this," Elena said. The red line looped back. It circled the stationary blue dot. Once, twice. "They didn't just leave," Elena said, her voice hard. "They came back. 10 minutes after they abandoned them, the family returned. They circled the pontoon boat at a distance of 50 yards. They sat there for 5 minutes. "Why?" the judge asked, his voice barely a whisper. "To check," I said. I stood up. Baxter tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a hand. "They came back to make sure the drug had worked," I said, looking straight at my father. "They came back to make sure we were passed out. They came back to make sure the fog was hiding us. They circled us like sharks, Your Honor. And when they were satisfied that we were helpless, they turned around and went to a steak dinner while my daughter froze." The visual was devastating. The red line circling the blue dot was not the path of a concerned family. It was the path of a predator. It was the geometry of a murder. "This proves intent," Elena said, slamming the file shut. "It proves they knew exactly where Michael and Lily were. It proves they lied to the police when they said they lost track of them. And it proves that the only danger to Lily Williams is the people sitting on that side of the courtroom." The judge stared at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at Arthur and Margaret. He looked at Richard. The veneer of the respectable, wealthy family had cracked. Under the fluorescent lights, they just looked like monsters. "Ms. Gentry," the judge said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you are to remain in this building. The bailiff will escort you to a holding room. I will be referring your conduct to the district attorney." He turned to the Williams family. "The motion for emergency custody is denied with prejudice," he ruled. "Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order against all petitioners. You are to stay 500 yards away from this child. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. And frankly, considering what I am seeing here, arrest might be the least of your worries very soon." Richard stood up, his face purple. "This is absurd. A watch? You are trusting a glitchy toy over the word of a CEO?" "Sit down, sir," the judge roared, "or I will hold you in contempt." Richard slumped back, defeated. I looked at Lily. She was smiling at the police officer, who was giving her a high five. We had won the battle. We had kept each other. But as I looked at the GPS map on the screen, at that red line circling my position, I realized something. The GPS data didn't just prove they were guilty. It proved they were thorough. And thorough people do not stop because a judge tells them to. Elena gathered her files. "We have them on the ropes, Michael. The wiretap warrant is active. Richard is going to make a mistake. He is going to try to fix this." "I know," I said. "He is going to try to find a scapegoat." I looked across the aisle. Vanessa was sitting slightly apart from Richard. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at her hands. She was trembling. She had seen the heart rate graph. She knew about the tea. But she hadn't been on the boat when they circled back. She had stayed at the cabin to rest. She was the weak link. "Elena," I whispered, "I need you to get a message to Vanessa, not through legal channels. I need you to slip a note into her purse." "What message?" Elena asked. "Tell her that Richard is planning to say she brewed the tea," I said. "Tell her that unless she talks to me tonight, she is going to be the one wearing an orange jumpsuit while the Williams men play golf." It was time to divide and conquer. The sharks had failed to eat me. Now I was going to make them eat each other. The empire of Williams Logistics did not collapse with an explosion. It collapsed with a ticker symbol sliding across the bottom of a television screen. In the 48 hours following the courthouse disaster, the company's stock value plummeted by 35%. The sharks on Wall Street smelled blood in the water. They knew that a CEO under investigation for the attempted murder of his own brother and niece was not exactly a stable investment strategy. For me, however, the plummeting stock was just background noise. I was not interested in their money. I was interested in their freedom. I sat in a safe house provided by the state police, a nondescript apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. Lily was in the other room watching cartoons with a pair of noise-canceling headphones I had bought her. She needed to be a child again, even if just for a few hours. I, on the other hand, needed to be a hunter. "They are bunkered down in the main estate," Detective Reynolds told me over the phone. "We have surveillance on the perimeter, but we cannot get a warrant to go inside yet. The judge needs more than just a GPS track and a watch reading. We need a direct link to the premeditation. We need a smoking gun." "I am going to get you a witness," I said. "Who?" Reynolds asked. "Your parents are stonewalling. Richard has hired a legal team the size of a football squad." "Vanessa," I said. "The sister-in-law?" Reynolds sounded skeptical. "She is part of the circle, Michael. She stuck to the script." "She stuck to the script because she thinks she is a writer," I replied, staring at a photo of my brother and his wife on my laptop screen. "She does not realize she is just a character, and Richard is about to write her out of the show." I knew Vanessa. I knew her vanity, her insecurity, and her greed. But mostly, I knew her fear. She was a woman who had married into money to escape a life of mediocrity, and she lived in constant terror of being sent back to it. I also knew, thanks to a private investigator I had hired 6 months prior, back when I merely suspected Richard of financial fraud, not murder, that Vanessa had a vulnerability. She was having an affair with her tennis instructor, a 25-year-old aspiring model named Julian. And more importantly, I knew Richard knew about it. He had been saving that information not to save his marriage, but to save his alimony payments, when he inevitably traded her in for a newer model. I called Elena. "Did she get the note?" "She did," Elena confirmed. "She is terrified. She agreed to meet you, but not at a public place. She is paranoid that Richard has trackers on her car." "Tell her to go to the underground parking garage of the Pacific Place Mall," I said. "Level D, the blind spot behind the elevator shaft. Tell her to take a taxi, cash only." 2 hours later, I was standing in the shadows of the concrete structure. The air smelled of gasoline and damp exhaust. I wore a baseball cap and a heavy coat. I was supposed to be in protective custody, but Reynolds had looked the other way for 2 hours. He wanted this as much as I did. A yellow cab pulled up. Vanessa stepped out. She looked like a wreck. Her designer sunglasses hid her eyes, but they couldn't hide the tremors in her hands. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist, looking over her shoulder every 3 seconds. "Michael," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty garage. I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. "Hello, Vanessa." She flinched, clutching her purse to her chest. "You look terrible." "I spent 6 hours in a freezing lake," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "It does wonders for the complexion." "I didn't know," she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "I swear, Michael. Richard said it was just going to be a scare. He said he was going to strand you there for a few hours to teach you a lesson, to make you sign the papers. He never said you would die." "Stop," I cut her off. "I do not care what you thought. I care about what is about to happen to you." I pulled a manila folder from my coat. It was a prop, a fake. Inside were just blank pages and a few printouts of standard legal statutes, but the label on the front was real enough. It read, "Operation Clean Sweep, Defense Strategy, Draft." "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the folder. "Richard's lawyer, Baxter, is a very expensive man," I lied smoothly. "But even expensive lawyers have leaks. This is the draft strategy they are preparing for if the police bring charges." I handed her the folder. "Read page 1. She opened it with shaking fingers. I had typed the first page myself on a vintage typewriter at the safe house to make it look official. Primary defense narrative. The defendant, Richard Williams, was unaware of the lethal nature of the tea. The sedative was procured and administered by Vanessa Williams, who has a history of anxiety medication abuse. Motive. Vanessa Williams intended to incapacitate Michael Williams to ensure her husband secured the company assets, thereby preventing her own impending divorce and disinheritance due to her infidelity with Julian Morales. Vanessa stopped reading. She stopped breathing. She looked up at me, her face draining of all color. "He knows about Julian," she whispered. "He has known for months," I said. "He was waiting for the right time to use it." "And congratulations, Vanessa, the time is now. He is going to throw you to the wolves. He is going to say you spiked the tea. He is going to say you were the one who was obsessed with the money. And since Dr. Vance is on his payroll, not yours, guess who the good doctor is going to testify against?" "No," she gasped, dropping the folder. "He wouldn't. I am his wife." "You are a liability," I said brutally. "And Richard does not keep liabilities. Look at me, Vanessa. He tried to kill his own brother and his 11-year-old niece. Do you really think he has any loyalty to you?" She stared at the concrete floor. The reality was crashing down on her. The luxury life, the safety, the status. It was all smoke. She was standing on the trapdoor and Richard had his hand on the lever. "What do I do?" she sobbed. "I don't want to go to jail. I didn't mix the tea. Margaret did. I saw her." "Then prove it," I said. "The police do not want you, Vanessa. They want Richard. They want Arthur and Margaret. But you have to give them something better than your word. Because right now, your word is worthless." She bit her lip, tears leaking from under her sunglasses. I have something. What? Richard, he is paranoid, she said, her voice trembling. He records everything. Meetings, phone calls. He thinks it makes him smart. He says it is insurance. I know he records business meetings, I said. But that is not enough. No, she shook her head. In the car, the Mercedes, the one we took to the lake. He had a dash cam installed. Not just for the road, for the cabin interior. He likes to listen to people when he isn't in the car to see what they say about him. But he forgets to turn it off when he is driving. My heart skipped a beat. Is the data still there? He hasn't cleaned the memory card yet, she said. He has been too busy with the lawyers. The car is in the garage at the estate. Can you get it? She looked at me terrified. If he catches me. If you don't get it, I said, leaning in close. You are going to prison for 20 years for attempted murder and child endangerment. And Richard will be laughing at you from his yacht. It is your choice, Vanessa. Be the victim or be the witness. She wiped her face. She straightened her coat. For the first time, I saw a flash of survival instinct in her eyes. It wasn't bravery. It was the desperate, clawing need to save her own skin. I will get it, she said. But I want a deal. Immunity. Total immunity. Get me the card, I said. And I will have the district attorney personally walk you out of the station. 3 hours later, at the state police headquarters, the atmosphere in the conference room was electric. Detective Reynolds, Elena, 2 prosecutors from the district attorney's office, and I sat around a table. In the center of the table was a small SD card that Vanessa had handed over with shaking hands before collapsing into a chair in the witness waiting room. Okay, Reynolds said, plugging the card into a laptop connected to the room speakers. Let us hear it. The audio crackled to life. It was the hum of a high-end engine, the sound of tires on wet pavement. Then, Richard's voice filled the room, arrogant, impatient. The timeline is tight. We need to be back in the city by 6. I have a dinner with the investors. Then, my father Arthur's voice, weak but clear. Are you sure about the dosage, Margaret? If he wakes up before the cold gets him. He won't wake up, my mother's voice cut in. It was the voice that chilled me to the bone. It was so casual. I used 3 times the normal amount. And Lily is small. She went under in 10 minutes. It is cleaner this way, no blood. Just a tragic boating accident. What about the shares? Richard asked. How soon can we trigger the transfer? The moment the death certificate is issued, Arthur replied. Since Michael refused to sign the liquidation, the voting rights revert to the legal guardian of his heir. If Lily is gone too, they revert to the next of kin. That is us. We control the 80%. We can sign the sale to Apex Global the next morning. $200 million, Richard mused. It is a shame, really. Mike was a nice guy, just useless. He didn't understand that business requires sacrifice. He was weak, my mother said. He was always weak. He let his emotions rule him. We are doing the company a favor. We are pruning the dead weight. The recording continued, but Reynolds hit the pause button. The room was silent. The prosecutors looked stunned. They deal with criminals every day, gang members, drug dealers, thieves. But rarely do they hear a wealthy, respected family discussing the murder of their own son and granddaughter with the same tone they would use to discuss a golf handicap. That is it, the lead prosecutor said, letting out a long breath. Conspiracy to commit capital murder. Premeditated. 2 counts. Plus fraud. We have them. There is one more thing, Reynolds said. He pulled a fax from a folder. The medical examiner just sent over the toxicology report on Lily's hair sample. He slid the paper across the table to me. I looked at the numbers. Subject, Lily Williams. Test, segmental hair analysis. Result, positive for zolpidem and fentanyl analogs. My hands shook. Fentanyl. They hadn't just given her sleeping pills. They had given her a synthetic opioid cocktail. a dosage that could have stopped her breathing at any moment. "We traced the batch," Reynolds said quietly. "It didn't come from a pharmacy. It came from a private supply Dr. Vance keeps for palliative care patients. We executed a warrant on his office an hour ago. He cracked in 5 minutes. He confirmed he gave the vials to Margaret Williams 2 days before the trip." I closed my eyes. The image of my mother handing that thermos to Lily played over and over in my mind. "Drink up, sweetie. It will keep you warm." She hadn't just drugged her. She had risked killing her instantly right there on the dock just to make sure I didn't notice. "Michael," Elena asked softly, "are you okay?" I opened my eyes. I looked at the recording device. I looked at the toxicology report. I looked at the faces of the law enforcement officers who were now ready to bring the hammer down. "No," I said, standing up. "I am not okay, but I am ready." "Ready for what?" Reynolds asked. "We are going to arrest them tonight. We are sending the SWAT team." "Good," I said. "But I want one thing. I want to be there." "That is against protocol," the prosecutor argued. "I don't care about protocol," I said, my voice rising. "They took my daughter to a lake to die. They sat in a car and called me dead weight. I want to see their faces when the dead weight comes knocking at their door. I earned this." Reynolds looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor looked at the evidence that I had practically hand-delivered to them. "Put him in a vest," the prosecutor said. "Keep him in the back, but let him watch." I walked to the window, looking out at the city rain. The game of cat and mouse was over. The trap was sprung. And the Williams family, safe in their mansion drinking their wine, had no idea that the storm was not outside. The storm was coming through the front door. The courtroom was not a sanctuary of justice that morning. It was a gladiatorial arena. The air conditioning was humming, but the atmosphere was hot-heavy, with the scent of nervous sweat and expensive cologne. This was not just a custody hearing anymore. After the revelations of the past 48 hours, the smartwatch data, the toxicology report, and the dashcam audio, the proceedings had mutated into a high-stakes preliminary hearing to determine if my family should be held without bail on charges of conspiracy to commit capital murder. However, the wealthy do not play by the same rules as everyone else. They have a different kind of ammunition, technicalities. We were 3 hours into the session, and my chest was tightening with a familiar suffocating rage. The Williams family sat at the defense table flanked by a phalanx of lawyers who charged more per hour than most people earned in a month. They looked battered, but not defeated. Richard was pale, his eyes darting around the room, but my father Arthur sat with the stoic arrogance of a man who believes he is untouchable. Their lead attorney, Baxter, was currently shredding our case apart. "Your Honor," Baxter boomed, pacing in front of the judge. "We move to suppress the audio recording allegedly obtained from Mr. Richard Williams' vehicle. This evidence was obtained without a warrant by a third party, Miss Vanessa Williams, who was acting under duress and coercion from the accuser, Michael Williams. Furthermore, Washington is a two-party consent state. Mr. Williams had a reasonable expectation of privacy in his own vehicle. This is fruit of the poisonous tree. It is inadmissible. It is illegal. And if you admit it, you are spitting on the Constitution." I looked at the prosecutor. He looked worried. He was whispering to Elena. The law was murky here. If the judge decided the recording was obtained illegally, it would be thrown out. Without the recording, we had the toxicology report and the GPS data, but we lacked the direct voice of conspiracy. We lacked the smoking gun that proved premeditation. "The defense makes a strong point," Judge Harrigan said, peering over his spectacles. "The admissibility of the car audio is highly questionable. I am inclined to reserve judgment on it, effectively pausing its inclusion in this hearing." A smirk touched the corner of Richard's mouth. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It was the look of a man who realizes he might just get away with murder because of a loophole. I felt a fire ignite in my gut. It was not the cold anger of the lake. It was a blazing infernal heat. I was not going to let them walk away on a technicality. I was not going to let a piece of paper shield the monsters who tried to kill my daughter. I stood up. "Mr. Williams," Elena hissed, grabbing my sleeve. "Sit down. Let me handle this." "No," I said, pulling my arm free. "I am done letting lawyers speak for me." I walked out from behind the plaintiff's table. The courtroom fell silent. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt, but the judge held up a hand. "Mr. Williams," the judge said sternly, "you are represented by counsel. You should speak through her." "With all due respect, Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady against the wood-paneled walls. "This is my life. This is my daughter's life. And I have the right to address the court regarding the character of the accused, specifically my father, Arthur Williams, who is currently asking this court to release him on his own recognizance." I turned my body not toward the judge, but toward the defense table. I locked eyes with my father. "I have a question for the defendant," I said. Baxter jumped up. "Objection! This is highly irregular. Mr. Williams is not a prosecutor." "I am the victim," I shot back. "And I am asking the court for 1 minute. Just 1 minute to establish the credibility of this family." The judge looked at me, then at the smirking Richard, then at the terrified Vanessa in the back row. He banged his gavel. "I will allow it. But make it brief, Mr. Williams, and tread carefully." I didn't need to tread carefully. Tread. I was about to detonate a minefield. I walked until I was standing 10 feet from my father. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, as if I were a disappointing employee he was about to fire. "Hello, Dad," I said. Arthur straightened his tie. "Michael, you are making a scene." "I just want to clear up one small detail," I said, my voice deceptively soft. "Do you remember the day of the trip? Before we got on the boat? Lily was playing with her drone on the dock." Arthur frowned, confused by the mundane question. He looked at his lawyer, who shrugged. It seemed harmless. "I remember," Arthur said. "Annoying thing, noisy." "Right," I nodded. "And then it stopped flying. You told Lily it was broken. You told her the motor had burned out and that you had thrown it in the trash bin by the marina office to save her the trouble of carrying it." "Do you remember saying that?" Arthur rolled his eyes. "I suppose. I was trying to be helpful. It was a cheap toy, Michael." "Why are we talking about toys when my freedom is at stake?" "So you confirm," I pressed, "that you claimed the drone was broken and discarded?" "Yes," Arthur snapped. "It was broken. I threw it away. Can we move on?" "Thank you," I said. I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense argues that the audio recording from the car is inadmissible because of privacy laws. They argue that we have no objective, impartial evidence of what happened on that boat. They claim my father is a truthful man." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small plastic evidence bag containing a micro SD card. "But my father just lied under oath," I announced, "because the drone was not broken, and he did not throw it away. He tried to destroy it, yes, but he missed." I held the card up to the light. "I found this drone jammed under the passenger seat of the pontoon boat in the middle of the lake. It seems that in their rush to stage the accident, they didn't check the crevices of the boat very well. And while the drone didn't fly that afternoon, the camera was on. It was recording for 20 minutes before the battery died. It was recording while the boat was still docked. It was recording while we were preparing the lunch." The color drained from Arthur's face so fast it looked like the blood had been sucked out of him by a vacuum. Richard stopped smirking. He started to stand up, his eyes wide with panic. "We recovered the video file yesterday," I said. "And I would like to play it for the court. It has no audio, so there are no wiretap issues, Your Honor. It is just video, pure unfiltered reality." "Play it," the judge ordered, ignoring Baxter's frantic shouting. The prosecutor connected the drive to the courtroom's main screen. The lights dimmed. A giant projection appeared on the wall behind the judge. The video was high definition. It was shot from a low angle, looking up from the floor of the boat, framing the rear deck and the helm. The first minute showed my legs walking back and forth. Then, it showed Lily sitting on the bench laughing. Then the frame captured Richard. He was wearing his pristine white polo shirt. He was smiling, talking to someone off camera. He looked around, checking to see if anyone was watching. He didn't see the drone lens blinking under the seat. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a pair of yellow-handled pliers. The courtroom gasped. I heard a juror whisper, "The pliers." On the screen, Richard knelt down under the console. The camera angle was perfect. It showed his hands working on the wiring loom. It showed him isolating the red power wire for the VHF radio. It showed the distinct snap as he cut the copper wire. Then, it showed him moving to the fuel line. He used the pliers to loosen the clamp. He pulled a small siphon pump from his waistband. There was no ambiguity. There was no maintenance. This was sabotage. But the video was not done. The camera angle shifted slightly as the boat rocked. It now captured the small table set up in the center of the deck. My mother, Margaret, came into the frame. She was holding a thermos and a paper cup. She looked over her shoulder at where I was standing at the grill, my back turned. Then, with a hand that was steady and practiced, she reached into her purse. She pulled out a small glass vial. She uncapped it and poured a white powder into the cup. Not a pinch. A heavy pour. She swirled the cup. She smiled. A cold, reptilian smile that I had never seen before. Then she walked out of the frame carrying the poison toward my daughter. The screen went black. For 5 seconds, the courtroom was so silent, you could hear the heartbeat of the person next to you. It was a silence of absolute horror. The defense lawyers were not objecting anymore. They were staring at the floor, distancing themselves from their clients. Then, the dam broke. "Monster!" someone screamed from the gallery. "Order!" the judge shouted, banging his gavel. "Order in this court!" I turned to look at my family. Margaret was sobbing into her hands, her body shaking violently. Arthur was staring blankly ahead, his mouth open a stroke, seemingly imminent. But Richard was looking at me. His eyes were not filled with regret. They were filled with the madness of a cornered rat. He had lost the company. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his reputation. And he knew in that split second that I was the one who had taken it all. He let out a sound that was not human. It was a primal roar of fury. "You ungrateful bastard!" Richard screamed. He vaulted over the defense table. It happened in slow motion. I saw the papers flying. I saw his lawyer trying to grab his jacket and missing. I saw the bailiff reaching for his taser. Richard charged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hate. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the judge. He just wanted to finish what he started on the lake. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and looked him in the eye. Just as his fingers brushed my lapel, 3 court officers tackled him. They hit him like a freight train. Richard went down hard, his head slamming against the floor. He thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, screaming that I was the one who deserved to die, that I was weak, that I was nothing. "Get off me! I will kill him! I will kill all of you!" Richard shrieked, frothing at the mouth. The cameras in the back of the room were rolling. The live feed was broadcasting this image to every news station in the country. The image of the impeccable CEO of Williams Logistics, pinned to the dirty floor of a courtroom handcuffed, screaming like a maniac, while his brother stood over him untouched. I looked down at him. "You are right, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through his screams. "I was weak, but you taught me how to be strong. You taught me that family is just a word. And you taught me that if you want to kill a monster, you don't use a knife. You use the truth." The officers hauled him up. He was bleeding from the nose. His suit was torn. He looked pathetic. "Get them out of here," the judge roared, standing up, his face red with anger. "I am revoking bail. I am revoking everything. Remand them to custody immediately. And I want the district attorney to add assault and battery to the charges." I watched as they were dragged away. Margaret was wailing as she was handcuffed. Arthur was wheeled out by an officer, his head bowed in shame. Richard was practically carried out, still shouting, still fighting. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind them. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence after a thunderstorm. I turned to the gallery. I saw Elena, smiling, tears in her eyes. I saw the reporters furiously typing on their phones, broadcasting the end of the Williams dynasty to the world. I walked back to my table and sat down. My hands were trembling just a little, not from fear, from the adrenaline of the kill. "It is over, Michael," Elena whispered, putting a hand on my shoulder. "They are never getting out." "No," I said, looking at the empty door where my brother had just exited my life forever. "It is not over. Now comes the hard part. Now I have to rebuild the world they tried to burn down." But as I looked at the screen, which was now blue, I knew one thing for sure. The ghost of the lake was gone. Michael Williams was alive. And for the first time in years, he was free. The gavel fell, and the sound echoed like a gunshot that signaled the end of a war. It took 6 months for the dust to settle, 6 months of hearings, depositions, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice. But the outcome was as absolute as the laws of physics. Richard, the Golden Boy, the CEO, the man who thought he could rewrite reality with a checkbook, was sentenced to 40 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The jury did not buy his defense that he was merely testing the boat. The video of him cutting the wires was played on every news channel in the country. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated assault, wire fraud, and securities fraud. The last time I saw him, he was being led out of the courtroom in a beige jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, his wrists shackled to his waist. He looked at me, but the fire was gone from his eyes. There was only a hollow, terrifying emptiness. He was a man who had existed entirely for his reflection in the eyes of others, and now he was invisible. My parents, Arthur and Margaret, did not fare much better. Because of their age and failing health, their lawyers begged for house arrest. The judge, remembering the toxicology report that showed lethal levels of sedatives in an 11-year-old girl's system, was not moved by their frailty. They were sentenced to 15 years each in a state correctional facility with a medical ward. They would likely die behind bars. The woman who had poured poison into a cup of tea with a smile would spend her remaining days eating cafeteria mash on a plastic tray. The man who had discarded my daughter's drone like trash would be just another number in the system. Vanessa was the only one who walked free, though free is a relative term. Her testimony was the nail in the coffin for the rest of them. She received 5 years of probation and a suspended sentence for her cooperation. But the Williams fortune was gone for her. She was stripped of her assets to pay for legal fees and restitution. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a small town in Idaho and is working as a receptionist at a dental clinic, living in a studio apartment. She is alive, which is more than she intended for me, but she has to live every day knowing that she traded her soul for a lifestyle she could not keep. With the criminal trials over, there was one final piece of business to attend to: the company, Williams Logistics, the empire my grandfather built and my brother corrupted. As the holder of the voting shares and the court-appointed executor of the frozen assets, I walked into the headquarters tower one last time. The lobby was quiet. The employees looked at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity as I took the elevator to the top floor. I called a board meeting. The room was filled with the same men and women who had looked the other way while Richard raided the pension funds. They sat there in their expensive suits, smiling nervously, expecting me to take the helm. They expected me to step into Richard's shoes to reassure the markets, to keep the gravy train rolling. They thought I was there to save their bonuses. I stood at the head of the table, running my hand over the polished mahogany. It felt cold. It felt dirty. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room, "and ladies, you have all been complicit. You saw the audits, you saw the red flags, and you did nothing because the dividends were good. Now, Michael, the CFO, stammered, sweating. We were misled by Richard. We are victims here too. You are not victims, I said calmly. You are parasites. I opened a folder and slid a single document across the table. This is a purchase agreement, I announced. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I have finalized the sale of Williams Logistics to Apex Global, our largest competitor. The room erupted. You can't do that. We will be redundant. The brand legacy. The brand is poison, I cut them off. There is no Williams Logistics anymore. Apex is absorbing the fleet and the infrastructure. They are guaranteeing the jobs of the warehouse workers and the drivers, the people Richard stole from. But as for the executive leadership team, I looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. You are all fired, effective immediately. Security is waiting in the hall to escort you out. You have 10 minutes to clear your desks. It was the most satisfying moment of my professional life. I watched them scramble, their arrogance evaporating into panic. I didn't keep a dime of the sale money for myself. I didn't want their blood money. I took the proceeds, over $200 million after the debts were settled, and I created the Silver Lake Trust. It is a charitable foundation dedicated to two causes: legal defense for victims of domestic financial abuse, and a scholarship fund for the children of the warehouse workers Richard had defrauded. I washed the money clean. I returned it to the universe. I kept nothing from my old life. I sold my house in Seattle. I sold my car. I burned the suits I used to wear to please my family. Lily and I packed 2 suitcases and a box of books. We got into a rented SUV and drove east. We didn't stop until we smelled the Atlantic Ocean. We settled in a small coastal town in Maine. It is rugged here. The waves crash against granite rocks with a violence that is honest, not treacherous, like the currents of the lake. The people are fishermen and boat builders, people who look you in the eye and shake your hand with calloused palms. They do not care about stock prices. They care about the tide and the wind. We bought a house on a cliff overlooking the harbor. It is an old Victorian with peeling paint that I am restoring myself board by board. It is drafty, it creaks, and it is perfect. We changed our middle names. I am no longer Michael Arthur Williams. I am Michael Hope Williams. Lily changed hers to Lily Joy Williams. But we kept the last name. I debated changing it. I wanted to scrub the name Williams from existence. But then I realized that would be letting them win. It would be admitting that they defined what a Williams was. No. We kept the name. We are reclaiming it. We are the Williams family now. And in our branch of the family tree, the name stands for resilience. It stands for survival. It stands for the fact that you can walk through hell and come out the other side without smelling of smoke. It has been a year since the lake. Lily is 12 now. She is in a new school. She has friends who do not know she was on the news. She plays soccer. She laughs. But sometimes when the fog rolls in off the ocean, I see her staring out the window, and I know she remembers. We both do. You do not forget something like that. You just learn to carry it so it doesn't weigh you down. Yesterday morning, the sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. The wind was 15 knots from the northeast. Perfect sailing weather. Dad, Lily asked over breakfast. Is the boat ready? I smiled. She is ready if you are. We walked down to the small private dock at the bottom of our property. Bobbing in the water was not a pontoon. It was a 30-foot sloop, a sailboat with a deep keel and a reinforced hull. I had named her the Phoenix. We boarded. This time there was no rush. There was no distraction. Checklist, I said, handing her the clipboard. Life jackets, Lily said, putting hers on and checking the straps. Check. Radio, I said. She turned on the Marine VHF. Radio, check, this is Phoenix, she spoke clearly into the mic. Loud and clear, the harbor master replied. Radio check complete, she said. EPIRB, I said. She pointed to the emergency position indicating radio beacon mounted on the bulkhead. Armed and battery tested. Engine, I said. Fuel tank full. Oil pressure normal. Cooling water flow confirmed, she recited. She knew every inch of this boat. I had taught her everything. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She was a sailor. We cast off the lines. I raised the mainsail, the white canvas snapping full, as it caught the wind. The boat heeled over, slicing through the water, with a clean hissing sound. We sailed out, past the breakwater, into the open swell of the Atlantic. The land fell away behind us. It was just us, the sky and the ocean. For a long time we didn't speak. We just let the wind do the work. The cold spray hit our faces, but this time it didn't feel like death. It felt like life. It felt like waking up. Lily sat at the helm, her hands steady on the tiller. She looked at the horizon, her hair whipping in the wind. She looked strong. "Dad?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Yeah, Lil?" She looked down at the water, then back at me. "We are really far out." "We are," I agreed. "Are we safe?" she asked. It was the question she had asked 1,000 times in her nightmares. I looked at her. I looked at the satellite phone clipped to my belt. I looked at the dual GPS systems on the dash. I looked at the survival suits stowed under the bench. But mostly, I looked at us. I walked over and sat beside her, putting my arm around her shoulders. The boat rose and fell beneath us, a living thing that we controlled. "We have the gear," I said. "We have the plan. We have the skills." I smiled, and this time, it was a smile that reached all the way to my soul. "But more importantly, Lil," I said, "we survived the worst people in the world. We beat the cold. We beat the darkness. We are not just safe." I looked out at the endless blue ocean, an ocean that went on forever, just like our future. "We are invincible." She grinned, and the shadows that had haunted her eyes for a year finally vanished, blown away by the salt wind. She pushed the tiller, and we turned the boat toward the sun, sailing straight into the light. I turned away from the memory, looking directly into the lens of the camera recording the story. I leaned forward, letting the silence hang for a moment. "Family is where you are born," I said, my voice quiet but intense. "But loyalty? Loyalty is something that must be earned. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, but they forget that blood can clot. It can stop your heart. Don't let your DNA be a suicide pact. If the people who are supposed to love you are the ones holding you underwater, cut the anchor. Swim. Because the shore is waiting, and trust me, the air on the other side tastes sweeter than you can imagine." Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, and I appreciate you walking this path with me and Lily. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet room, or maybe somewhere near the water? Please leave a comment below and let me know. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice and survival, please make sure to subscribe to Calm Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear that they too can survive anything. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember, you are the captain of your own ship.